Dyer wave
3.
Our anthropology is not derived by human psychology or, empirical data from MIT or something like this. It's derived from the revealed aspect of what we see in Christology. And so there's no real way to diagnose man's problem and to understand man and man's anthropology, as I said, without the right theology. Logos is the icon of the Father, and man is the icon of God. We are the image of God.
Dyer wave
3.
All right. Microphone.
Join with audio.
What's up? Welcome.
Okay, can you hear me, Jay?
Yup.
Okay, perfect. We're good.
How are y'all today?
So, good. How you doing?
Doing good.
Good. I don't know if Sneck was able to get in touch with you. He said he had to
Yeah.
cancel. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It says something about his parents have to leave one day earlier, and it's just kind of like emergency packing or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I told any of the mods if they wanted to, they could come on here if they can pull themselves away from their NATO operative duties, since everybody in our Discord server is simultaneously CIA, KGB, and NATO all at once.
Yeah.
But
right,
well, welcome Father Deacon, and welcome Kai. By the way, guys, I'll have the links to Father Deacon's channel and Orthodox Shahada, which is the project of Lewis and Kai together. Yep. And welcome. We're going to do the debate review. I don't have the entire debate queued up. I don't think we need to listen to the whole debate again. I think it's pretty much fresh in everybody's memory. I remember it vividly. We all, I think, watched it. And I think Kai wanted to kind of lay out some of his critiques that he believes are unique, to his take. So I'll go ahead and let him start. I don't know if you're welcome to stay. I mean, I'm not trying to say you need to leave, or you can do what you want. But you wanted to go ahead and have like the first stab at it, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of take a little bit of a moment just to kind of re-encapsulate the entire debate. Before I do that, just want to just say congratulations, Jay. I think you knocked it out of the ballpark. This was an excellent debate.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of us really were really pleased to see, because this was a long time in the making, and we're glad to see the effects of it. Also, I want to say congratulations to Lewis as well. He did an excellent job as a moderator.
Yep.
He didn't inject himself. He didn't try to give preference to any one side. He just let you guys talk it out, and just made sure you guys followed the rules and everything. So he did a really good job. I liked his enthusiasm. It kept the crowd going. So yeah, so thanks a lot, Lewis. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
I wanted to add too that I really appreciate you guys setting that up. I mean, that was of course not an easy debate to set up. It actually took quite a bit of planning, quite a bit of strategizing, and you guys doing a lot of work getting together. What the reading materials are that they're going to be using, that he uses. And isn't that who you guys actually had to write an actual letter to? Isn't that what happened?
Well, we were driving because at that point we weren't actually in contact with him yet, and we had no means how to contact him. Like, I think Lewis had tried to contact through Facebook. He wasn't getting any responses. We just had no means of contacting him, so we were going to draft up a letter to just actually mail it to him to his mosque or something like
That's
that.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it worked out. He managed. There was one fellow that came onto the Discord server that was actually in contact with him, and then just that led to another. And Lewis was able to hook things up, make it happen.
And Father Deacon, real quick before we get to Kai's analysis, how are you, Father Deacon?
Oh, I'm doing great. Today's a great day. I got coffee in me. What else?
I can barely hear you. Can you speak up a little louder?
Turn my volume up.
Yes, I have you up all the way.
How about me turning my volume up? Would that help? Hello?
A little lower than that. That's a little much.
How about now?
That's perfect.
Perfect? Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me on. And I second everything that Kai says. Congratulations. You did a great job. Lewis did a wonderful job. I mean, that's like moderator par excellence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who could wish for a better moderator. So I'm very proud of him. And I want to thank Kai, Lewis, and Jay for all the hard work that you did. And just for the, defending the kingdom of God and the gospel. So praise God.
All right, well, Kai, if you want to, feel free to go ahead and start. I'm going to grab my coffee real quick. So give us your analysis.
Get some popcorn. Get something. It's going to be a little bit while. It's going to be a little bit lengthy, just because I don't want to do my analysis in sound bites. Okay, so for me, there are three main things I would like to address. Okay, this is by no means covering all aspects of the debate. When we get talking with Jay and Father Deacon Ananias, we'll go into other details. But these are three prominent issues that really stood out for me. Okay. So this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy monologue. Please indulge me, but I want to provide a thorough, robust analysis. Okay. I think these are very important points and necessitate going into a bit of finer detail. Okay. They are directly related to the debate itself, but also highlight the approach that Muslims in general take in their apologetics with non-Muslims, okay, and or those unfamiliar with Arabic, okay, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a few moments. Okay, the first issue is related to Jay talking about the universe being created at a point in time, or to use an equivalent term often encountered in the literature, moment, but always with the understanding that God transcends time. The use of the terms time and moment are meant to indicate that the universe is contingent on God and not eternally coexisting with God or eternally emanated from God as a necessary effect. Certainly, we don't use the terms time and moment as if to imply some kind of temporal applicability to God, since God transcends time. In my opinion, it was a bit disingenuous for Sheikh Asrar to imply that Jay, an Orthodox Christian, was using the word time as if to mean that God is somehow bound by and limited by temporality. Being an Ashari, Sheikh Asrar is expected to de facto subscribe to the doctrine of occasionalism, which necessitates constant creation ex nihilo annihilation repeatedly. So time itself is actually atomic or discrete in the Ashari school of thought. The Ashari position prohibits a single creation ex nihilo at some point, which is then indefinitely sustained by God, because this scenario introduces secondary causality, okay, which Asharism vehemently opposes. Rather, there is constant creation ex nihilo annihilation pairing. All the prominent Ashari Mutakallimun held to this doctrine of repeated creation ex nihilo annihilation. It's not a debatable issue in Aqidah. If you as a Sunni Muslim believe that Allah created the universe ex nihilo just once and then sustains it indefinitely, then you are actually a Mu'tazilite, which means you allow for secondary causation. This is one of the reasons why Jay explicitly mentioned atomism and occasionalism during the debate, as it is directly related to causality and how to understand Tawhid and Allah's attributes, which Sheikh Asrar completely ignored. The raison d'etre of occasionalism in Ashari Kalam is to preserve Allah's omnipotence, sovereignty, and free will by restricting causal efficacy strictly to Allah, in complete opposition to the Mu'tazilite position. Occasionalism has a direct bearing on how one conceives of Tawhid. Each atomic time slice or creation annihilation pairing would be an occurrence or an occasion of God acting, hence the term occasionalism. The universe would have its quote-unquote first moment when it came into existence the first time, the first creation ex nihilo. Now, when Jay was referring to the point in time that the universe was created, it was an indication that the universe was not a priori established with God's existence or alongside God's essence. In other words, the existence of the universe is not a necessary effect of the essence of God. So the universe being contingent means that it is dependent on God, not coexisting eternally alongside God. By contingent is also meant that the universe's existence was preceded by its non-existence. So if the universe is not established alongside God's existence the way that the divine attributes or sifat are established alongside God's essence, then there is a coming into existence of the universe that is not a necessary effect. This coming into existence is an explicit act of God, but which in the Islamic scheme necessitates a potentiality being actualized in Allah. This actualizing of potentiality requires a fundamental change in God in the Islamic scheme. However, Sheikh Asrar believes he can escape the potentiality problem and the necessary effect problem by simply saying that Allah willed to create the universe at some moment or point in time, whatever term you want to use, to actuate the existence of the universe from non-existence, the act of bringing a potentiality into actuality by his decree, by his will, and not by necessity. But this actualization in the Islamic scheme does necessitate a fundamental change in Allah. So the issue in the debate is about Sheikh Asrar not grasping the implications of Islamic philosophy. Sheikh Asrar is of the opinion that he can take the position of Al-Ghazali, as elaborated in the Incoherence of the Philosophers, Tahafut al-Falasifa, by stating that the universe will actualize not because of a necessary effect, but rather because of Allah's will or decree, thus making the universe truly contingent. Those of you who are familiar with Al-Ghazali would have immediately recognized that this is the position Sheikh Asrar was taking in this debate. And all of this is connected to the attributes of Allah, to created effects, and as Al-Ghazali makes explicitly clear in the third treatise in his Al-Iqtisad fil I'tiqad, that all of Allah's actions are created and therefore contingent, and that none of Allah's actions are obligatory. Jay was pressing Sheikh Asrar on all these aspects. Now, just a quick side note, I found this hilarious. There was actually a Muslim that joined one of our Discord servers last night, pretending like he's knowledgeable in Islam, and he mentioned in the discussion, and I quote, he says, Allah's actions are also eternal and they don't begin to exist from non-existence. In other words, the actions of Allah are not contingent. When I saw this, I posted him a screenshot of Ghazali from Al-Iqtisad fil I'tiqad, where he explicitly states, and I'll quote you, the entirety of the acts of God, exalted is He, are contingent, and none of them may be described as obligatory. And the individual never posted, left the server, just simply left the server. Now, only the Eastern Orthodox Christian position, because of both the essence-energy distinction and the doctrine of the logi that we see in St. Maximus and St. Gregory Palamas, which incidentally is something that you did not hear Sheikh Asrar talk about, can solve the problem so as to not have potentia in God while maintaining the doctrine of creation ex nihilo. In this debate, Sheikh Asrar demonstrated a total lack of familiarity with the Orthodox position. Okay. The Islamic position is unable to avoid potentia in God because of the way it conceives of the divine attributes. Simply taking Al-Ghazali's position or invoking the notion of quote-unquote active potency or passive potency, whatever kind of potency, does not solve the problem for Muslims. Okay, the Muslim concept of God being an eternal creator without a creation is not logically explainable by means of invoking some kind of potency, but rather forces the Islamic system into a reductio which necessitates a fundamental change in God once actualization of the universe occurs. Saying that Allah has active potency or passive potency with regards to the creation of the universe, or merely the ability to create the universe, does not mean that Muslims have solved the problem. Okay, it's a case of saying so doesn't make it so. Now, with regards to the specific vocabulary employed by Jay, Sheikh Asrar took issue with Jay using the word time or phrase point in time. Let's look at what Al-Ghazali says in the Incoherence of the Philosophers. Okay, right here. I don't know if you guys can see it. Okay, it's from the Marmara translation, which contains English on one page and the Arabic text on the facing page. And this is from page 15. Okay, sorry here. What do we got? We got, the world was temporarily created by an eternal will that decreed its existence at the time in which it came to be, that the preceding non-existence continued to the point at which the world began, that existence prior to this was not willed and for this reason did not occur, that at the time in which the world was created, it was willed by the eternal will to be created at that time, and for this reason it was created then. Okay? Firstly, we see here that Sheikh Asrar's basic position is indeed based on Al-Ghazali, namely the manner or decree in which God wills to create the world in order to avoid the world being a necessary effect or an eternal emanation alongside God. Secondly, you notice how the English translation uses the term time. But let's look at the Arabic, okay? Existence at the time in which it came to be. وجوده في الوقت الذي وجد فيه. What's the word Al-Ghazali uses in Arabic? Waqt. What does waqt mean? Okay, let's take a look. Al-Mawrid. What does it mean? Waqt. Time. Period of time. Point of time. Juncture. What are synonyms in Arabic to waqt? Hin, zaman. So it's completely okay for Al-Ghazali to say time or point in time, waqt, but it's not okay for Jay to use the term. It's not okay for Jay to use the very same term that Sheikh Asrar's own scholar uses.
Well, that was just to get out of the objection.
Yeah,
well, Jay,
well,
haven't we brought that up before?
Yeah.
I'm using a critique that can't be applied to me.
Yeah.
Just
hang on a second. Don't worry. I've got all this fleshed out. Don't worry. I got all this fleshed out.
This is awesome. Keep going.
Okay. So just from a purely linguistic perspective, because Jay doesn't know Arabic, he can't read Al-Ghazali in the original Arabic. We see that Sheikh Asrar was being completely unreasonable in critiquing Jay's usage of the term time. Sheikh Asrar was trying to completely deny Jay the ability to convey certain concepts merely on linguistic grounds. Okay? Since Jay's critique is damaging, Sheikh Asrar tries to deny the critique altogether by denying Jay the ability to even communicate an idea, or if permitting usage of the term, gives it an unintended meaning. Okay? Yet this is the very term that Muslims use amongst themselves. Okay? You clearly see that Sheikh Asrar's position is that of Al-Ghazali. Okay? You would expect that him being a sheikh, he read Al-Ghazali in the Arabic. He knows that Al-Ghazali uses the term waqt, and he knows that the corresponding English term is time. Okay. Also, in saying point in time, Jay was illustrating how Sheikh Asrar relies on time-dependent statements predicated to Allah, when, for example, saying Allah is the first and last, but then will deny usage or predication when asked about the point in time when the universe came to be. Jay was demonstrating how Muslim apologists arbitrarily and inconsistently apply predications to Allah, namely how in some instances conceptual likening is admitted when it's to the advantage of the Muslim, when the Muslim is arguing his case, but then disallowed when it's disadvantageous to the Muslim, when the non-Muslim is trying to make his case. Okay, when Muslims say that Allah is first, it's meant that Allah is not contingent. his existence was not preceded by non-existence. And similarly, last to again mean not contingent, in that Allah's existence will not be followed by non-existence. But when Muslims say first and last, these words, as Jay pointed out, first and last, they're creatures. Being creatures entails a conceptual likening to Allah to describe, not just indicate, to describe a divine attribute or divine quality, al-wujud, existence. Yet Allah is supposed to be totally dissimilar to creation. A classic text that combines Ashari Kalam and Maliki fiqh is the Murshid al-Mu'in of Ibn Ashir, which has been used for hundreds of years by those following the Maliki madhab to train its scholars in both fiqh and aqidah. This text and its commentaries is highly authoritative in Islam. Anyone who wants to reject this text basically rejects the Maliki madhab in its entirety. This is how authoritative this text is. It is explicit in the collected commentaries by Al-Shanqiti that with regards to Allah's attributes, there can only ever be linguistic correspondence, not conceptual likening. Okay? From page 73 in the English translation titled Islam in the School of Medina, okay? Muhallafa, his being different from his creation. This means that there's absolutely no resemblance between the creation and him, not with respect to his essence or attributes or actions. The reality of this negation is the denying of any corporeality or accidental inessential nature, or everything pertaining to these two. Allah, exalted is He, says, nothing is like Him. He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. So that famous ayah, Laysa kamithlihi shay, meaning there is no essence like His essence, no name like His name, no action like His action, and no attribute like His attribute except through a linguistic correspondence. Laysa kamithlihi shay, meaning there are no attributes like His attributes except through a linguistic correspondence. Okay? Linguistic correspondence is not the same as conceptual likening. Jay was demonstrating how Sheikh Asrar relies on conceptual likening when it's to his advantage, but then disallows it when it's to his disadvantage. Okay? And this leads me into the next issue, issue 2. Why Sheikh Asrar brought up Ibn Taymiyyah. It's directly related to issue 1. Okay? Why would Sheikh Asrar bring up Ibn Taymiyyah, even if it was a passing remark? There's a reason, and it's not because Ibn Taymiyyah is a supposed great scholar, the Sheikh al-Islam. Sheikh Asrar is a seasoned debater. Okay, he has tactics, he has strategies, he has reasons why he says what he says. But not all of these reasons are immediately apparent to everyone. Sheikh Asrar brings up Ibn Taymiyyah to give the audience the appearance as if to legitimize Ibn Taymiyyah for a much more nuanced purpose, because Ibn Taymiyyah does allow for likening. He allows for analogia. So this strategy by Sheikh Asrar allows him to straddle the fence and liken Allah to creation when it suits him, but then deny the likening when it's problematic. It lets him take contradictory positions under the umbrella of Islam, where a plurality of opinions abound. Most Muslims don't see this because they themselves are wholly ignorant of the various Islamic aqaid. But the kind of likening Sheikh Asrar is doing is not the overt anthropomorphism of Ibn Taymiyyah. And I don't want people thinking that I'm saying that Sheikh Asrar is ascribing body parts to Allah. That's not what I'm saying. The likening is a lot more subtle. It is with respect to how he wants to be able to talk about the attributes using analogia. If Sheikh Asrar limited himself to only the Ash'ari school, then his entire case falls apart. Why? Keep in mind the linguistic correspondence restriction I already mentioned from the Murshid al-Mu'in, and couple that to what we find in the exposition of the Sanusi Creed by Sheikh Fuda, namely that there is no conceptual likening between Allah and creation. The two are mutually exclusive. Consider page 146 specifically. Quote, contingent beings are those things that exist after non-existence, be they substances, accidents, or other than that. Parentheses, it is assumed that the world contains that which is neither a substance nor accident, such as pure abstractions. Close parentheses. Allah is absolutely dissimilar to all of that. Okay? Pure abstractions, Allah is absolutely dissimilar to all of that. Everything besides him is contingent. End quote. Okay, so you get that? So saying Allah is the first and last are pure abstractions. And by the Sanusi Creed, Allah is absolutely dissimilar to all of that, because first and last are contingent. They are creatures. The Sanusi Creed also makes it absolutely clear that anything that is inherently part of something that is contingent is itself contingent. So there's no possible way to describe Allah as first and last apart from predicating a purely linguistic correspondence without imposing contingency onto Allah. Okay, now you see why Sheikh Asrar found it important to work Ibn Taymiyyah into his position, to legitimize Ibn Taymiyyah as an authority in Islam so that he could do a little aqidah swapping behind the scenes when convenient. An Ash'ari relying on Ibn Taymiyyah in a debate on Ash'ari aqidah would be like Jay relying on Arian beliefs instead of Orthodox ones when talking about Christ. Okay? With respect to Ibn Taymiyyah in particular, consider the following. You have the very prominent and well-respected historical Ash'ari mutakallim Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, a giant in the Shafi'i madhab, issuing a fatwa against Ibn Taymiyyah in his celebrated Al-Fatawa al-Hadithiyah, saying he's a heretic. You have the well-respected Ash'ari mutakallim As-Subki in the commentary to this very Murshid al-Mu'in, saying Ibn Taymiyyah is closer to heresy than belief. You have the monumental Ash'ari mutakallim Fakhruddin Razi, who was a staunch advocate of atomism and developed so-called proofs for atomism, whose commentary to the Quran is published in 32 volumes, who also wrote a book critiquing anthropomorphism, the theology of Ibn Taymiyyah, titled Ta'si al-Taqdis, which itself was attacked by Ibn Taymiyyah. There are many, many more Ash'ari mutakallimun who considered Ibn Taymiyyah to be a heretic. But now, here is the real kicker. Sheikh Asrar himself recommended Jay to read the book on the Sanusi Creed as expounded by Sheikh Said Fuda, which Jay held up to the camera during the debate. Sorry, I only have it in an electronic copy. I don't have a physical one to lift it up here. It was the pink-colored one, okay? And it's from that which he quoted to substantiate his arguments. Okay. For those who don't know who Sheikh Fuda is, he currently resides in Jordan and is universally recognized among normative Sunni Muslims as being one of the foremost authorities of Ash'ari Aqidah in the world today. Now, listen carefully This is a little bit of a lengthy quote. Listen carefully what Sheikh Fuda writes about Ibn Taymiyyah in his introduction to the book on the Sunusi Creed, and then you're going to see how it ties into what Sheikh Asrar was doing. Quote, "We see a school of thought that was bar none the weakest Islamic school of thought, the way of anthropomorphism, the way of the Hashawiyah, crass literalists, and the way of resemblance between Allah and the creation. Those who ascribed themselves to this school in the past generations were too afraid to express that their beliefs openly. Most of the time, they would employ indirect allusion and ambiguous statements that were shared between them and others so as to provide them a way out, save themselves if they were asked. This group used to affirm a direction for Allah and call it ulu, loftiness or highness. They would say Allah is high. No one differs regarding general highness. However, this group used this general word and meant by it a physical direction. They used to describe Allah with the properties of corporeal bodies and call him the one of tremendous rank, knowing that this is agreed upon by all people. When these anthropomorphists would employ the word rank, they would mean size, confinement, and place. The Muslims who declare Allah exaltedly transcendent employ the word rank and intend by it nobility and the all-encompassing attributes such as omnipotence, knowledge, and the belief that nothing escapes the control of Allah, the exalted. They also intended by it his transcendence in his reality and existence. I'm almost done. In the past, the crass Hashawi rabble-rousers were too afraid to openly and explicitly declare their belief that Allah, the exalted, possesses bodily appendages, parts, and extremities. These days, however, they explicitly declare their belief in such matters and pull no punches. Furthermore, they try to refute their opponents among the people of truth and disparage them, labeling them as Jahmis, atheists, and people of negation. In fact, one of their senior-most scholars, to whom they have given the appellation Sheikh al-Islam, right? Just a side note, this reference to Sheikh al-Islam is a veiled reference, but everyone understands he is talking about Ibn Taymiyyah here. Sheikh al-Islam has explicitly stated that the sacred law has not deemed resemblance between Allah and the creation and those who do so blameworthy. In other words, it doesn't constitute kufr. It could be an incorrect position. It could put someone who might be a heretic, but it doesn't constitute kufr. And so because it doesn't put Sheikh Asrar out of the fold of Islam, he can go ahead and use that position. Okay? So you hear Sheikh Fuda refers to Ibn Taymiyyah's position as being that which allows for resemblance between Allah and creation. And that such a position is erroneous. Okay? Do you Muslims perceive the dissonance? Okay? Sheikh Asrar is an Ashari. The Ashari Aqidah only permits linguistic correspondence to Allah. So by linguistic correspondence, you can say that Allah is al-wujud, but what does that actually mean? Allahu alam. How does the attribute of al-wujud differ from the attribute of al-hayat, differ from the attribute of al-irada? Allahu alam. Okay? Linguistic correspondence means that there is a difference, that these divine attributes can be predicated to Allah, but because Allah's attributes are totally dissimilar to creation, they cannot even be described. It is not that the attributes are unique in some way to Allah, that it is not applicable to us as creatures, but that we can otherwise describe them and understand them how they are applied to Allah. No, in order to describe Allah's attributes, even if they are totally unique to Allah, necessitates the employment of analogia, creatures, the very words of spoken language, to convey something about Allah who is totally dissimilar to creation, okay, including that which is pure abstraction, as the Sunusi Creed tells us. The moment you use language, i.e. creatures, to describe how the divine attributes actually differ between each other, how you can tell them apart, the employment of analogia, you are engaging in conceptual likening, which is strictly prohibited by the Ash'ari school. This is where Ibn Taymiyyah comes in, okay? Because Ibn Taymiyyah has no problems with using analogia. Sheikh Asrar recommended Jay read a book on the Ash'ari Aqidah that is expounded by one of the world's foremost authorities on Ash'ari thought, Sheikh Fuda, who provides a scathing criticism of Ibn Taymiyyah. But Sheikh Asrar never recommended Jay read any works from Ibn Taymiyyah. Nonetheless, Sheikh Asrar had no problem coming into the debate legitimizing Ibn Taymiyyah as an authority in Islam, even if just in passing, in order that he be able to hold to two contradictory positions: linguistic correspondence on the one hand, and conceptual likening on the other, interchanging between the two when convenient, okay, in the hopes that Jay would not realize. And you see Sheikh Asrar doing this during the debate. He does not need to explicitly promote anthropomorphism like Ibn Taymiyyah and his followers, but he has no problem employing the general notion of Ibn Taymiyyah's conceptual likening when talking about the attributes. One thing that most Ash'ari Muslims in general exhibit, and this observation is based on numerous interactions with Muslim after Muslim after Muslim after Muslim after Muslim, is the affirmation of only linguistic correspondence to Allah, but then proceed to employ conceptual likening when discussing the attributes, completely violating the whole notion of only linguistic correspondence. The example that Sheikh Asrar gave of writing the name Jesus and being able to conceptually understand who is being talked about is missing the point entirely. No one is denying predication on purely linguistic grounds. But when you say that Allah has multiple attributes, and then you proceed to discuss how those attributes differ, in addition to asserting that they differ, relies on conceptual likening. The comprehension of what those attributes entail necessitates analogia in creation, even if that analogia is with respect to pure abstraction, which, as we know, is contingent. A person being alive or possessing the attribute of life, for example, is not to say they possess a concrete, tangible thing. The attribute itself is an abstraction, but to understand the attribute or the abstraction to which we predicate the term attribute, the very notion itself, you need to liken it to the created order. So to describe how Allah's various attributes are to be distinguished from each other, how al-wujud differs from al-hayat, differs from al-irada, and so on, necessitates a likening to the created order so that we can comprehend these distinctions. This is analogia. This is what Ibn Taymiyyah permits, contrary to the Ash'ari position. Under Ibn Taymiyyah, you can make the analogia, but you have to follow up that analogia at some point with bila kayf. To employ even pure abstractions to discuss the attributes beyond just simply naming them necessitates analogia, likening to creation. Okay, there's no way around this. There's no way around this. And even many great Muslim mutakallimun failed to grasp this. You even see this error in the Sunusi Creed itself, where Sunusi contradicts himself on this very issue. Okay, it's a serious problem for Ash'aris. It is an insurmountable problem. Sure, you might have Ash'ari scholar after Ash'ari scholar after Ash'ari scholar writing copious amounts of books on the subject, but that doesn't mean that what they write is logically coherent and consistent. It really does just amount to babbling and contradictory positions masquerading around as logic. And this is what Jay was demonstrating in the debate. At the end of the day, Muslims have a serious logical problem with regards to the attributes. And every single time they try to solve this problem, they end up contradicting themselves. Every single time. Now, some Ash'aris will try to get out of the logical problem by saying something like some likening is permitted, or some type of likening is permitted, or a certain degree of likening is permitted. But this is just a purely arbitrary and ad hoc assertion. Okay, it's an absurd position, and it's an argument motivated out of desperation rather than logicity. Okay, it's just Muslims trying to have it both ways. Sheikh Asrar did not rely on sources solely from within his own Ash'ari school of thought to advance his position. Instead, he also relied on the one person most despised by Ash'aris, Ibn Taymiyyah. But this is a tactic that we Orthodox see on a regular basis employed by Muslims time and time again when they engage us, namely taking contradictory positions and swapping aqaid based on the situation, or even creating their own unique kind of patchwork aqidah. Okay, an example of patchwork aqidah would be, say, to take the Ash'ari position on divine attributes, but reject Ash'ari occasionalism and instead take the Athari position with regards to causality, completely failing to grasp that the various branches in Aqidah, the furu', are actually all intricately interlinked and intertwined with each other, such that changing things around has a devastating domino effect. Okay, so for example, failing to grasp that something like rejecting Ash'ari occasionalism actually pushes one towards the Mu'tazilite position with regards to causality and free will. But in order to stave off this Mu'tazilism, it necessitates the adoption of certain doctrines like Wahdat al-Wujud, which then ends up pushing the person towards panentheism or monism instead. Okay? People who take the patchwork approach to Aqidah think themselves intelligent, but in reality exhibit nothing more than extreme arrogance. Okay, they haven't gone through all the logical steps to realize the reductio consequences of rejecting occasionalism while holding to ontologically real, distinct, eternal attributes. The patchwork approach, or even the Aqidah swapping approach, is blatant disrespect of one's scholarly heritage. It's not that the earlier scholars of Islam are infallible, but rather before someone settles on a certain course of action and establishes their own unique position within Islam, they need to first humble themselves in recognition of the fact that the scholars of previous generations were in all likelihood more smarter than them. One needs to fully comprehend the implications of the positions one wants to reject. There's a reason why every single prominent Ash'ari mutakallim holds to both ontologically real, distinct, eternal attributes and occasionalism. The two doctrines can't be decoupled without serious repercussions. The Ash'ari position with respect to occasionalism, okay, is the single most important argument against the Mu'tazilites. All the other polemics against the Mu'tazilites are secondary. Occasionalism is the primary rebuttal against the Mu'tazilites in order to safeguard Allah's omnipotence, sovereignty, and free will, and at the same time safeguards Allah being munazzih. You sacrifice the former if you go in the Mu'tazilite direction, and the latter if you go in the panentheistic direction necessitated by Wahdat al-Wujud. So one or the other when you reject occasionalism, okay? Yet you maintain ontologically real, distinct, eternal attributes. Some Muslims think that Aqidah is like a buffet that you can pick and choose what you want to consume. However, just like a buffet, combine too much of the wrong foods and you're going to end up with a really bad stomach ache. But you don't get the stomach ache while you're eating. The stomach ache comes later when it's too late and you end up vomiting all over yourself, and then you got to go shopping for new underwear. Those of you who follow the Ash'ari school of thought, ask yourselves, seriously ask yourselves, why in the world would an Ash'ari Sheikh rely on Ibn Taymiyyah in any capacity whatsoever, but especially in a debate on Aqidah? Is the Ash'ari Aqidah deficient that it needs Ibn Taymiyyah? Sheikh Fuda in his introduction to the Sunusi Creed is very explicit that it is the Ash'aris who promote the correct Aqidah, the Ash'aris who promote correct Islam, in explicit contrast to the Ibn Taymiyyah position. But Sheikh Asrar, an Ash'ari, relies on Ibn Taymiyyah. He doesn't tell us that he's relying on Ibn Taymiyyah, he's just doing it, okay, because Ibn Taymiyyah allows for analogia, which contradicts the Ash'ari position. Okay? Now, the basic Ibn Taymiyyah position, not its fully fleshed out elaboration, just the basic idea of permitting likening, is needed by Sheikh Asrar in order to avoid the logical problem of the attributes when you restrict any predication to Allah as being only linguistic correspondence, which is exactly what Jay was going after. Okay? Jay repeatedly stated that the Orthodox Christian position doesn't have a problem with analogia because it doesn't restrict its theology like the Ash'ari position does. But Sheikh Asrar tries to apply the Ibn Taymiyyah position to the attributes as a way out, hoping Jay would not realize that this is what he's doing. Okay, this move by Sheikh Asrar, in my opinion, was intellectually dishonest. Sheikh Asrar couldn't pick just one Aqidah and stick to it. He was not able to prove his position from just the Ash'ari school. And this demonstrates the complete epistemological failure of Islam. Jay was exposing the inconsistencies and incoherent position of Sheikh Asrar. Anyone knowledgeable in the various formulated expositions of Islamic Aqidah, for example, Sanusiya, Tahawiyya, Nasafiyya, Wasatiyya, and various commentaries like Taftazani, Maidani, Ghaznawi, Shaybani, Ibn Abi al-Iz, and others would have recognized this instantly. Okay, and now the last issue. Okay, this is the third issue I would like to address, and I'll wrap up. It's concerned with the argument that Sheikh Asrar made to the effect that people have a natural disposition to rationally conclude in Islamic Tawhid over that of Christian Trinity. Well, if Islamic Tawhid was so straightforward and obvious within the rational grasp of natural disposition, then why did Sheikh Asrar recommend Jay to read hundreds upon hundreds of pages of material in order to understand Tawhid? To read Ghazali, to read Sanusi, to read Taftazani, and so on. Consider also Maturidi's Kitab al-Tawhid, the book of Tawhid. 535 pages as published in Arabic. Do you need 535 pages to expound something that is of natural disposition? Does that make sense to you? Moreover, when it comes to natural disposition, How can Muslims be certain that the Amazonian savage, or that guy is stranded on an island who has never been exposed to outside civilizations, will come to the conclusion through rational thought that God has ontologically real, distinct, eternal attributes that are established with the essence of God, versus the Mu'tazilite position that the essence and attributes are really one and the same? Is the Mu'tazilite position any less tawheed than the Ash'ari position? Still one God. You can't be guaranteed that the Amazonian savage will arrive at the Ash'ari position, because Islamic tradition itself debated the very point of how to conceive of the attributes. Normative Sunni Muslims will say that the Mu'tazilites are heretics, but then you're missing the whole point. It's not obvious from the outset why the Mu'tazilites are heretics. Sunni Muslims have to argue the case. They have to present the case why the Mu'tazilites are wrong, but in order to do that, Sunni Muslims have to first develop the relevant theology. Consider what we find in Reliance of the Traveler, okay? A classical manual of Islamic sacred law of the Shafi'i madhab, okay, about bid'ah hasana and fard kifaya, to develop the theology in order to combat the Mu'tazilites. On pages 915 and 916, it has been stated by Iz ibn Abdussalam that innovations, bid'ah, fall under the 5 headings of the sacred law: the obligatory, unlawful, recommended, offensive, and permissible. The first category comprises innovations that are obligatory, wajib, such as recording the Quran and laws of Islam in writing when it was feared that something might be lost from them; the study of the disciplines of Arabic that are necessary to understand the Quran and Sunnah, such as grammar, word declension, and lexicography; hadith classification to distinguish between genuine and spurious prophetic tradition; and the philosophical refutations of arguments advanced by the Mu'tazilites and the like. Because his classification of innovation, bid'ah, was established on a firm basis in Islamic jurisprudence and legal principles, it was confirmed by Imam Nawawi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and the vast majority of Islamic scholars, who received his words with acceptance and viewed it obligatory to apply them to the new events and contingencies that occur with the changing times and the peoples who live in them. Now, if Sheikh Asrar wants to dispute this position coming from the Shafi'i madhab, the Mu'tamad position, then he will be doing so not against me, but against Imam Nawawi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and the vast majority of scholars. Okay? I'm giving you proof from your own sources, Muslims, but go ahead and reject it. Okay? We as Orthodox would actually love nothing more than for you to actually reject and refute your own scholars, because then it would just go on to prove an even bigger problem with Islam, namely the inadequacy of a reliable epistemology. Okay, so it's a lose-lose for you Muslims either which way. Now, pause and think about this. Your scholars had to enshrine it in Sharia, in Islamic sacred law, that it is bid'ah hasana, a worthy innovation, and fard kifaya, communal obligation, to develop Ash'ari theology in order to counter the Mu'tazilites. Now remember, Ash'ari himself used to be a Mu'tazilite until he defected and set up his own theological positions. Now, and here's the clincher, this developed theology of Ash'ari relies on the Quran, which is what? Revelation. if Sheikh Asrar's concept of tawheed was so simple and so obvious according to natural disposition as he claims, okay, then you wouldn't need this course of action. You wouldn't need to develop the Ash'ari theology based on revelation in order to counter the Mu'tazilites. So the argument from Sheikh Asrar falls flat on its face. It's in sujud. The Ash'ari position on Tawheed that Sheikh Asrar wants to promote is not the obvious choice. Asking the question, does natural disposition lead you to Ash'ari Tawheed or Orthodox Trinity? The answer is neither. It's a false dichotomy. Both positions rely on revelation. What does Sheikh Asrar say right at the very beginning of the debate? The issue, Ilmul Kalam, is not straightforward. Go and listen to that in his opening statement. Okay? So, on the one hand, Sheikh Asrar tells us that Ilmul Kalam, which encompasses the topic of Tawheed and the Sifat, is not that straightforward. And then proceeds to try and make the case that natural disposition leads you to the Islamic conception of Tawheed. Are we after the Islamic conception of Tawheed or the Ash'ari conception of Tawheed? If Islamic Tawheed, then why not Mu'tazilism? Islamic Tawheed manifests in various conflicting conceptions. But then Ash'ari Tawheed requires revelation. So it's a lose-lose for Sheikh Asrar. On the one hand, Sheikh Asrar recognizes that the notion of Islamic Tawheed is multifaceted and complex, namely that it's not just believing in one God, but also how you believe in that one God. For example, the way one conceives of the attributes directly affects Tawheed, requiring hundreds and hundreds of pages to explain, and which are ultimately grounded in revelation. But then on the other hand, Sheikh Asrar is arguing for a conception of Tawheed that just means monotheism, as if to imply the doctrine of the Holy Trinity is not monotheistic or not of the same kind of monotheism and something that is overly complex. Okay. This approach is underhanded and intellectually dishonest and relies on purposeful equivocation on the notion of Tawheed. Sheikh Asrar's position on this whole issue is not valid argumentation for two reasons. One, it goes against the very dictates of what Islam itself mandates. Why would you need to formally enact in Sharia as Bid'ah Hasana and Fard Kifaya the theology that is supposed to be the natural disposition of everyone? It makes absolutely no sense. And two, equivocating on the notion of Tawheed. Muslims want to take two exclusive positions and say Tawheed is a complex subject requiring hundreds upon hundreds of pages to explain, and at the same time say it's a very simple concept. Moreover, there's a dissonance when you say that no conceptual likening is permitted with regards to Allah, yet it requires thousands of pages of elaboration. Ya akhi, Tawheed, it just means monotheism, Habibi. Wallahi, it's obvious, yani. The Christians believe in three gods. 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And Deuteronomy 18 and John 16 are prophecies of Muhammad in the Bible. Khalas, the Jews and Christians have been refuted. Takbir Allahu Akbar. Okay? Sheikh Asrar can't have it both ways. Okay? Jay was spot on with his assessment of the attributes and how they affect Tawheed. He correctly cited Muslim sources as evidence and demonstrated the contradictions in the Islamic position. Yet Sheikh Asrar didn't cite a single Orthodox source as evidence, yet had the audacity to question whether or not Jay read the material. What I see from Muslims is that none want to admit how contradictory the Islamic position really is. So they will accuse Jay of sophistry or misrepresenting or misunderstanding the Sunni position. But this is just pure cope on the part of Muslims. Muslims cannot fathom that non-Muslims are capable to comprehensively understand Islamic theology better than Muslims themselves. We as Christians listen to what Muslim scholarship and scholars say about Islam. We as Christians have more respect. We have more respect for Muslim scholars and Muslim scholarship than Muslims themselves have for their own scholars and their own scholarship. And as a result, we are able to expose the contradictions and inadequacies and errors of Islamic theology and epistemology. Thank you very much for the debate, Jay. Okay, the Orthodox position was unscathed. You did an impeccable job demonstrating the absolute, unquestionable superiority of Orthodoxy, while the Muslim position got decimated. Subhanallah. Just one thing just that I can end with here. Muslims who want to learn more about Orthodoxy, you can come over to Jay's Discord server. It's the largest Eastern Orthodox Christian server on Discord. Just, I think, shy of 7,000 members. Come, discuss, ask your questions, come and debate us, come and debate your Aqidah. We welcome it. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat as usual, and I want to remind people that if you want to ask your super chat questions, feel free to. We'll get to those here in a little bit, and also you can find Lewis and Kai over at Orthodox Shahada. That's their channel. Let me see, where is the link? I'll put the link in here in a second.
Yeah.
Father Deacon, you want to give your assessment? I mean, we don't have to. I mean, we can have a conversational back and forth. So you don't have to give a lecture. Not that I'm faulting you, Kai. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Thank you, Kai. God bless you, brother. Well, so what else do I need to say? Kai covered it all.
He did cover quite a bit of territory.
Yeah. Of course, I'm going to take pull from my strengths in epistemology.
So, are you Muslim? Are you going to take the Muslim position? Did you get convinced?
Yeah. By the way, did you see? I'll give it one thing to the Sheikh. He has he's halfway to orthodoxy. He's got the hat. I was impressed. I was like, "Hey, man, I like your style. You're halfway there." Anyway, so. Yeah, I'm going to take more of an epistemological. We discussed some things and some issues with the epistemology and philosophy. And Kai, I really thought your analysis about time was really well put. That's exactly.
Thank you.
Again, we have to use these words. And this is something that I feel that it comes up a lot in Islam, is that, as well as other groups as well, that words can only have one meaning, that they're univocal. And so when you use that it has to, well, obviously with the case that you're pointing out with a moment, now we're restricted within our kind of tensed language and various things like that it's always encouched within these kind of times, but we can make distinctions about, well, does that refer to God having a time before time, or is he restricted? Is he in time and stuff like that? So I thought you did an excellent way of hashing that out and making those distinctions. And I think it probably, the way you put it was correct. If he should have known about that, and I don't know, you're more of an expert when it comes to this than I am, but if Sheikh was supposed to actually know about that, then maybe perhaps that was a bit dishonest for him to pick on that point the way that he did. Also, I'd like to talk about it didn't seem that Sheikh Asrar was getting Jay's point about the difficulties of the analogia entis. And so maybe we can take a little bit of time to kind of unpack that. The problem isn't whether you're actually saying there's an analogy there. Problem is whether your system, your paradigm, your theology can allow for that in a consistent way.
Yeah.
And so what I saw was he just kept repeating the position, but you were asking.
Yeah, it's exactly what Thomas do. We ask for the justification given what you say elsewhere, not for you to restate the position 20 times. We know you have that position. That's not an argument.
Yeah, that's right. So, and again, with debates, you're asking for. I don't want to know what your position is. I studied the position.
Yeah.
And I'll give it to you, Jay, too. It did seem obvious that you had obviously read up on all the works necessary for that debate on from his side, and he didn't reciprocate that because it became very apparent to me that he was quite ignorant of the Orthodox theology and the readings. And so that perhaps, in my analysis, that perhaps is a failure on his part to prepare for the debate. I think, to be fair to him, he probably thinks that all Christians are pretty much the same. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the majority of the arguments were basically responding to what he thought was like some kind of evangelical position.
Yeah, I think they spend a lot of time in that. And so again, just going into a debate to read up on the literature and the position of the other person. So bravo, Jay, that you had done that. It came readily across that you had prepared that, whereas Asrar didn't actually seem to know that. But let's talk a little bit about what is the problem with his paradigm or theology in the Analogia Entis, and then we could maybe perhaps even go into some of the modal collapse. Kai had picked the modal collapse arguments. Kai had picked up a little bit on that, as far as he was trying to skirt the issue of talking about potencies, and we'll talk about what does it mean to be God, eternally creator or eternally willing. What are the consequences of a position like that? And the whole point of a debate is to actually point out that you're holding to incompatible positions, i.e. you're inconsistent, and you can't provide justification for that. So I thought you did really well at that. So anything you want to interject there, and then we could go into some of those details?
Well, I mean, I have a whole list of all the things that I wanted to touch on that didn't get addressed. So, and some of it's going to, I'm sure, overlap with what you are going to get into. So maybe we could start with the first thing that I brought forward about natural theology and epistemology, which is partly based on the argument in your paper. And so for us, of course, there's no such thing as natural theology because there's no uninterpreted raw data that just comes as a brute fact. Natural theology is a discursive step-by-step reasoning process by which we begin with certain empirical sense data observations, and then by step by step, we basically come to the conclusion that perhaps some kind of generic deity exists. Nothing about this position is consistent or tells us what kind of deity, or that it's a personal God, or the God of Aristotle, or the God of the Satanists. So natural revelation is different from that. The Orthodox position is that there's a revelation, the content of which is the Logos, which is Christ. It's the same content as what is the information of Scripture, just two different mediums. And so that is not a process of syllogistic or discursive reasoning from sense data. It is rather a direct, intuitive, noetic sense that there is a God and that we are accountable. Mm-hmm. That's why when you read Romans 1, Paul says that all men are accountable to God. He doesn't say anything about syllogistic, empirical sense data reasoning to some kind of probabilistic deity. He says that all men in their hearts know that there's one God and that we are accountable to him, and that we have morally failed to keep his commandments, his 10 commandments, and to love him. So the natural theology assumption here is what betrays a certain fallacious conception of God and of epistemology from the outset. And so that's why their position boils down to some kind of contingency argument. And contingency arguments are, as we know, premised on causation, premised on sense data causality, the idea that there are secondary causes, chains of causes, or dependency chains, right? So you can flesh this argument out two different ways. You can have a cause effect in a vertical sense, a horizontal sense, or you can characterize this in a hierarchical dependence chain in a vertical sense. So it doesn't matter which way you construct this argument, whether it's a causal chain or whether it's a top-down dependence chain. Phaser, for example, basically gives up on trying to do a causal chain argument and says, I'll just do a dependence chain argument and give up arguing for creation ex nihilo. Now, at that point, we've surrendered Christian apologetics and we're not arguing for the God of Christian theism. And so that's a point that I think is worth mentioning here, is that the Thomist and Sheikh Asrar have exactly the same apologetic and exactly the same approach, exactly the same epistemology. And as Dr. Bradshaw says, natural theology is bound up with a generic theism and with a divine simplicity modal collapse position. Now, let's be clear, because the position that they have in their school is not modal collapse in a strict sense. They will recognize real distinctions in God, real distinctions amongst the attributes. Now, later on, of course, I stress that that position is actually inconsistent. But regardless, when we do this causal chain or causal dependency argument, there's multiple problems with this approach to theism, and beginning our theism with this. And he said many times over, I begin my theism with my mind looking at the external world. Well, as Kai pointed out, he believes in a system that does not allow for secondary causes in the created order. He's an occasionalist. That's the classical Islamic position according to that school that he comes from. And they think that this protects other attributes of God, right? So if there's secondary causes, they think, it's a silly argument, that gives the power of Allah to creatures. Okay. Then they turn around and predicate to Allah all of these features of creatures. I mean, it's a totally back and forth schizophrenic position. But to say that there's no causal chains, right, would preclude and negate any possibility of contingency causal arguments, right? So out with the Kalam cosmological argument. There's no causal chains. There's no cosmological argument. And it doesn't matter whether it's a horizontal chain or a vertical chain. So our desire then for complete explanations and our desire to predicate universality based on instances of sense data is not a justification. It's not a justification to appeal to another piece of sense data to say that you have attained to the universality of causal principles.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I mean, that's what his whole argument relied on, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's hierarchical dependence chain or whether it's a linear causal chain. To say that my piece by piece sense data gets me to the universal category of causation and that all of reality is under the domain of requiring a cause because it's contingent is itself a non sequitur.
Yeah. So, and this is where David Hume's our friend.
Right.
You know what? We never, as David Hume points out, you never perceive the cause of your perceptions. You don't perceive causality. So there goes in empiricism, actually. So now everything's metaphysics, in which case we can turn it back around and go, so you're giving me a whole big metaphysical story. Like, where do you find that? Watch what they'll do. Well, I learned that from my empiricism, right?
Yeah.
What's better known by myself, and what, and then I proceed to what's better known by nature, which would be the metaphysics. But look what they actually just did. They just did circular reasoning. So they're giving you a metaphysical story. Here's my metaphysical story, and I'm justified in that. What if it's actually the case in reality? The metaphysics. So if you ask them, well, how do you know that that's actually the case? That's going to be dependent on, well, if what I'm saying about the metaphysical story is true. So that's viciously circular. which exactly, and that would have been helpful, to point out with more people like this, that you're just making up a metaphysical story. Where do you find that? Oh, I find it in, if you just grant me my whole story about the way that we know from sense perception and do natural theology, then I can actually justify that's how I know it.
Yeah. Let's. I'm sure a lot of people are not getting this, and so let's make this point clear, because this is in your paper, and I covered this last night a little bit on one, or a couple nights ago on the streams that I did. And this comes from Aristotle. Your paper, of course, mentions the multiple sections, and then I think that what's confusing, I can tell you
from prior analytics or physics and the metaphysics.
Right.
Yeah.
What's confusing is the term nature there, because most of the time when we hear nature, we think of the external world and this kind of stuff. So remember that in this scheme, there is a wall between God and the world. And that wall is not just a metaphysical wall, it's also a wall in the domain of epistemology. And so if you look at this, the way that Father Deacon lays this out in his paper, he notes that when Aristotle speaks, number one, of what is better known by us versus what is known in itself by nature, in this case, known in itself is God. All right, God is the being that is the cause, that is the actualizer, that is the first being, the greatest being, or whatever. And so how do we know this? Well, we know this via this, what is known by us. Now, in the Aristotelian system, just like all the natural theology systems, this is empirical sense data. Doesn't mean that they only believe in materialism or that they only believe in empiricism, but that there's nothing in the intellect that is not first in the senses or in sense data. So the epistemological starting point of the position is this. And every time we have this argument, people in that position just are dishonest and say, you're saying we're empiricists. You're saying we don't believe in abstract objects. No, that is not what I said. What I said was that your epistemic starting point is here. But here's the irony that Father Deacon points out in his paper, which is that this is known by this, and the distinction itself between these two is known via this. Do you see the problem in that? Because if I say that 1 and 2 are the case because of this one, and I ask you, well, how do you know this one or this one? You just simply say, well, by this one.
Because of that one. Well put. That's exactly.
I mean, that's how simple
point.
This is to refute. And it's amazing, kind of, really, that people don't see the flaw in this. I mean, that they now you say, well, okay, but how does that translate into a problem for this argument? Well, here, God and world, we're in the world, right? We are knowing things via sense data. There's a wall between God and the sense data, because all you ever know is the created effects. You don't know this in itself. You never directly experience this. All you're experiencing is a series of created effects. So guess what? This is the same problem that Thomists have. There's a problem just as much for Thomism as it is for the Muslims or any position of classical theism or natural theology. Because it's grounded in autonomous epistemology. It's not grounded in revelation. It's not that hard to figure out. It's not a difficult argument, right?
And let's talk about that too.
Yeah, can you comment on this? Like, why does this not work? Or somebody might say, well, what's wrong with me just being circular and saying that, well, I mean, what can we do? There's nothing better than this. This is all we've got. It's just common sense that that's the case, Father Deacon. Come on.
Well, I mean, everybody's variety of epistemological theories are all differing, and they're all saying, well, what else do we have?
Yeah, well,
I mean, this is common sense.
Well, we all know that's common sense, right? That's
so you have epistemological theory A, B, C, and D, and they're all contradicting each other, and they're all saying, but it's just, what else do we have? I mean, it's just common sense. I mean, we just got to go with this, right? So that's not going to solve the problem. That's not all that we have. Right. And again, the problem is that there's no justification in that. So even if they were, first of all, foundationalism and natural theology is not supposed to allow for circularity, right? Now, just because a coherentist epistemic holist might allow that, that doesn't mean that he gets himself out of the problem too, with regards to whether that account can provide a justification for their justification criteria. But the problem is that with this, they don't allow for any circularity. And second of all, that doesn't provide you any good reasons for believing it. So if it's just, well, it's my theory, A is true, if and only if B is true. B is true. And how do I know B is true? Because A. Okay, well, how does that end up being a justification?
Yeah, but Father Deacon, we got you because you believe that there is a level of circularity. So we got you.
The big problem is, again, at the paradigm level, we allow from circularity because
we're not foundationalists. I mean, I don't know how many times we have to say this, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's nothing behind the triune God, if that's the starting point, there's nothing that you put, there's no arguments that you filter him through or your empiricism or anything like that, then if that's the necessary condition and his revelation to mankind is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, then at that level, it is circular. But that's not a problem. That's certainly not a problem for us, right? And that shouldn't be a problem in and of itself once you put it at that paradigmatic level of what are the necessary conditions for the possibility of all experience, morality, science, knowledge, all these things. Well, at some level, the necessary condition, there's nothing behind that, right? So it's going to refer back to itself.
Ultimately circular when it comes to the justification of the principles themselves. So how do we know logic is logical? Exactly.
The real problem is that natural theology, like all of the various philosophical projects throughout history, are an autonomous epistemology.
Yeah. They attempt to reason without taking into account the fall of man. But if the Bible is correct, then you can't do natural theology because the fall has affected man's reasoning and man's interpretation of the external world. Hence why death is not natural. Death is the enemy.
And you're contingent, too. It's a problem of contingency. And so man's not able to provide the kind of absolute and necessary grounds because they're always contingent. And so what does natural theology actually say? Oh, it's what natural, I'll just quote John Paul's encyclical letter from Fides et Ratio, which is also in Vatican II. What is natural reason? Depends upon sense perception and experience, and which advances by the light of the intellect alone. What the mind alone can actually know without God. So that means, again, whether you're an atheist, a Muslim, a Christian, what is natural theology actually saying? Oh, we can actually all just know the metaphysics, start with that, without actually granting that, know the epistemology is true, not justify that, and all just reason up to not only God, but like these different conclusions. The only difference, and what does Pope John Paul II say, right? By the natural light of reason alone, without God. And so what that means, the only difference between the atheist, the Muslim, the Christian, the Buddhist, the Hindu, is that it's granting that they actually carry out their project, that they can know that they know.
Yeah, and this was a great point Bonson always made, which is that if coherent knowledge is possible without God, and you concede this to the atheist, that he's just as good as far as he goes, then you've already conceded your whole position. And the God that you're arguing for is no longer the God that is the basis for the transcendental categories and the meaning and language that the atheist is partaking of.
So let me put it another way. ask a natural theologian, can I give a coherent account of how knowledge is possible in metaphysics, experience, and morality without God? Those, without, acknowledging at least modally that God.
And they'll say yes.
They'll say yes. Okay, so then the fact of the matter is that, okay, we all do this. We can all we can all do epistemology and metaphysics together, right? It's the ecumenism of metaphysics and epistemology. We could all do it together, right? We're all doing this. We're all in this together, right?
Atheistic humanism.
Right? We're all in this together, guys. The only thing is, it's just, in the end, the atheist just errs, right? He just gets one other fact wrong, that's God,
so it's
that
doing
God exists. Well, then he's
apart
not
from,
necessary.
It's doing apologetics apart from the rest of your theology, which is silly.
Yeah. So that means that God is not necessary. Well,
he's not necessary
for knowledge.
For reasoning. He's only necessary in some later down the chain metaphysical sense of some kind of generic being. Okay, but that's not who God is. God is not a generic being opposite of an eternal world. God is the personal, triune, creator God. It's Jesus.
Yep. Does everybody see how I cashed that out? Again, ask somebody, can I get a coherent account
I want to add a few points here.
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
In other words, if we were to go to an unbeliever and we were to say that there are facts and objects in the world that are neutral and that are intelligible by themselves, you've already more or less conceded and lost the argument for the kind of God that you want to be arguing for. And the reason for that is that, first of all, the arguments like the cosmological argument, Kalam, and so forth, they posit all of these things that are assumed and not justified and don't lead to, they're non sequiturs. For example, if God is an object, right, and you include him amongst the things that exist, then existence is now a univocal concept. And if all that exists has a cause, then God must also have a cause. If you attempt to exclude God from the all that has a cause, which is what, of course, all the cosmological arguments do, why? Because he is the creator and not a creature, then what we've done is assume the very thing that the argument is supposed to prove, right? Which is that there is an exempt being, right? But that begs the question, why is God exempt from the causal chain? The causal chain is supposed to show, right, that there is a being that is not contingent. How is the argument going to show that when the argument exempts him, right? When we say, well, everything does have a cause and everything is contingent except God. But that's what this argument is supposed to show. So that's the first problem. Secondly, the argument starts from the created order and tries to reason to something supernatural on the basis of sense data, right? But this, first of all, doesn't even get off the ground, as I was asking Sheikh Asrar, because you don't have access to universal experience. You have a finite series of sense data experiences, and none of those things get you to a universal. So you just have to assume that there are universals. But I'm asking you if you believe that everything comes from sense data when you actually sense a universal. You don't. So that doesn't work. It's a fallacious move. It doesn't make sense to rule out either an infinite regression because of the fact that the universe could never have been started. In other words, a smart unbeliever could just simply say, okay, well, maybe the universe didn't have a start. That was Aristotle's argument, right? Aristotle believes that the eternal actualizer, the first uncaused cause, has to eternally be a cause. If he's God, if he's a truly pure act being, then he must actualize at all times. And so Aristotle is more consistent in this regard because he doesn't posit that there has to be a temporal starting point to the universe. In fact, the eternal actualizer is always actualizing his opposite, the created world. And so now you have a dyad. All right? Basil critiques this in Hexameron 2. So the next point there is that if the universe, by the way, even if you did concede that the universe had a start, it doesn't require that the being be singular. In fact, Aristotle contradicts himself and posits at sometimes multiple first causes as well as a single first cause. So in other words, on what basis a priori are we supposed to assume that oh, well, we all know there has to be a first cause to the universe, and that first cause has to be a single first cause. In other words, we have all of these tacked on things that we're supposed to accept just to move in this argument. But this argument is supposed to be the starting point. So this argument is asking us to accept a host of metaphysical things, and as Father Deacon said, a giant metaphysical story that has not yet been justified. This is a terrible argument. These arguments, all of these arguments that are classical arguments, are just not very good. The other one, of course, which often gets pointed out, which I think is a valid critique, which is this argument assumes that what's true of it's a parts whole fallacy, right? And Bonson used to give the example of Legos. He would say, well, if each Lego weighs an ounce, do I conclude that when I build a 10-foot statue out of Legos that the entire 10-foot statue then therefore weighs an ounce? Mm-hmm. No,
fallacy
because just because something's true of the parts, it doesn't follow that it's true of the whole. And by the way, it's also non sequitur, because if all events in nature have a first cause, there's no reason to infer from natural experience through causation or through succession or through dependence chain that the first cause is non-natural. In other words, perhaps there's an equally natural first cause. In other words, what does my experience of the natural world do to prove a supernatural first cause? In other words, this is David Hume's great pumpkin argument, right? If I see a bunch of pumpkins in a field, do I conclude from that there was a great supernatural pumpkin that gave rise to all of the pumpkins? No, I just assume that there was a chain of pumpkins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do I get to the great pumpkin from the chain of pumpkins?
How did my PhD advisor put it? Dr. James O'Shea. Just because every baby has a mother doesn't mean all babies have a mother. One mother. Do you get it? It's the pumpkin.
It's the David Hume, Charlie Brown, great pumpkin argument. Exactly. So in other words, these are all just, and you say, well, why are you going to this? Haven't you and Father Deacon critiqued Thomism a million times? Yes, but they have the same epistemology. Don't you understand that this itself, that the fact that the Thomist and the Muslim are doing the exact same moves shows that this is all a waste of time and bankrupt? What good is an apologetic that both a Muslim and a Thomist share, or that a Scientology proponent could use? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, why are we letting people just make up stories? Like, you just made that up. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that these are all just made up stories. What does St. Paul warn? Vain philosophy built on the traditions of men. Storytelling.
Yeah. And by the way, I think people have a hard time accepting that Aristotle could have been wrong, right? In other words, a lot of Thomists, a lot of people who adopt this system. I mean, in your paper, you've got here, the citation comes from Posterior Analytics 71b, Prior Analytics 68b, Physics A, Metaphysics Zeta, Topic Zeta. So you're telling me Aristotle got his empiricist starting point wrong? Who are you to question Aristotle?
Who are you?
That's literally the move they make. They're like, you can't. Who are you to say Aristotle's wrong? That's what Thomists do. And can I add too that one thing I've noticed from the Muslim analysis here is that the Islamic system is just a patchwork. It's just taking from all these Greek metaphysics. It's like, let me have a little bit of atomism. Let me take a basic bitch Aristotle, and let me combine that with the patchwork of Nestorianism, Judaism, and Christianity that is original first few centuries Islam. So then you get Kalam within a few centuries, which is, again, not an advanced, it's a very crude Hellenic system.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is.
But Jay, you pointed that out too. When you were bringing that up, Shar had basically said that, well, we reject a lot of Aristotle. I reject a lot of Aristotle. Well, that's not the problem. If you reject certain stuff of Aristotle, it's the stuff that you do the stuff that you do accept and have brought in is problematic.
Yeah, it's the epistemology that you accept, and that's what I critiqued multiple times.
And nobody was saying that, like, yeah, every single one of your beliefs matches on perfectly to Aristotle, or you've embraced the whole Aristotelian system. You've been influenced and embraced enough of the stuff that's problematic in the epistemology that's going to cause a problem for you. That was your point.
Yeah, and notice that the Thomist and the Muslim do two different moves here, right? The Muslim says there's absolute dissimilarity between Allah and his creatures, and then attempts to do all this predication and divine naming, which is based on creatures by admission. And when he says to get around this dilemma, well, it's just a conceptual signification. It doesn't mean that in your head the actual attributes of Allah are there. Well, I wasn't making that argument, and just
that wasn't your argument.
And just to say that it's merely conceptual doesn't solve the dilemma, because the conceptions are still creatures, and they bear no similarity to the multitudes of attributes that you believe are really distinct. So
yeah, that's
it's just moving the problem back a step. It doesn't solve the question, and so you have to have analogical predication at some point. Now the Thomist does the exact opposite and says, well, there is analogical predication, and it's to the essence of God. Creatures bear a analogical reflection to the divine essence. And then Thomists turn around and say, via negativa and apophatic theology, there's no similarity between creatures and God's essence, right? So they have a because they attempt to do via negativa.
Oh, and remember the key part there is God's essence is identical to existence, right, but then it doesn't. So that's the end theme, the missing hidden kind of premise.
Yeah, but it's not just that, it's also all the created world comes to be because there's a divine idea which is identical to the divine essence. And by the way, there's no real distinctions in the divine essence.
So let's talk a little bit, and we'll go through this, what Asrar didn't seem to get, because he thought he was getting out of this by saying, oh, that's just conceptual. It doesn't refer to God in himself or anything like that. Okay.
Well, then it doesn't pick out real distinctions in Allah. That's the point.
And it may not pick out Allah.
And it doesn't tell you anything about Allah.
How do you know that it's not? And this is the issue that comes up in philosophy of language. Yeah. The problem of intentionality. And that our words and sentences pick out stuff. Okay, they hit when I say, I'm thinking about J in Tennessee, it doesn't hit J in Colorado. Right, that stuff like that. Okay, so what do we have here with words? You have a sign, and then the thing signified. Okay, so at the very least, there's an intentionality, whether it refers to something in it or just the mode of signification or something conceptually in you. There's an intention. That means there's a relation of some sort between the thing, the sign, and the thing signified, at the very least, right? Now,
the other irony too, by the way, which I don't know if what his specific school thinks about language theory, but if you read the commentary on the Taftazani commentary, which is one of the books that was recommended, I can't get this right. They have a crude correspondence theory of language and truth. So what do words mean? What do propositions refer to? Well, the word just refers to the object in the world. Oh, really? Is that true then of the predication of Allah?
Right. So anytime that you have a relation, whether it's in language through intention, whether it's making a comparison of greater or less or something like that, or a causal relation, in order to relate two things, there must be at least some likeness in order to relate the two. So this is what he wasn't getting. If you're saying this is nothing like this, then it doesn't matter what you think that word's actually saying or the way that you're signifying or whether it refers to the thing itself or your mind. It doesn't, the word never gets to intentionally to pick out the object of intention. So for all you know, it could be hitting my cat.
Yeah, and even his
or
example
rock,
of
or
the word Jesus picking out Jesus, right? I mean, that disproves his system.
yeah. So I wish you would have saw that's actually what the critique was. You can't actually, if you say there's nothing like Allah, and then watch will have these words talk about him, but they'll just be conceptual in our mind. It doesn't work.
Yeah, okay, then exactly. It tells you nothing about Allah because the concepts in your mind are creatures. And again, let's look at this little graph again to illustrate this. Just simply, it's not rocket science. If we're saying, and his school appears to have a basic correspondence theory of truth. Here's Allah, right? And the many things that we say about him. Oh, he's one. He's got these 99 names. He's first. He's last. He has sight. He has hearing, etc. Right? So here's Allah. These are the names, and you could look at them as different ways to predicate about him. But guess what? One, first, last, sight, hearing, speech. Those are all determinants that come from the created order. Now, I'm not saying that they believe that Allah possesses creatures. I know they don't say that, and that's why he just kept restating the position as if I was. But the point is that they make such a stress on apophaticism and the dissimilarity of Allah to creatures that Allah becomes unknowable and unpredicable. You can't even say anything about Allah. In other words, no true propositions tell you anything about Allah. Because in their own system, they believe that all of these words are creaturely things. So it's just a simple, silly flaw in their system. And by the way,
Jay, isn't that my...
Yeah, I want to stress that one of their important commentaries, which is the Juwani commentary on page 23, brings up this issue. It actually addresses this issue. Do you know how they address this issue? I brought it up in the debate. I'll show you guys on the screen how they address this issue.
I'll show you guys.
I'll show you. The Juwani commentary on page 23 reads as follows. Should it be asked whether we hold to the doctrine that in existing, and this is just using existing as the example of comparison and analogy, that the exalted Allah the exalted meaning Allah resembles the temporally produced, or do we deny it? We assume that it is a matter not susceptible for discussion. In other words, you can't ask that question. Yeah, exactly. So when we come to a problem in your system, you mandate people can't answer that question because it's obviously a defeater for the system.
Well, Calvinism does the same thing, don't they? They use a lot of similar tactics.
I'm not, maybe, but I can't think off the top of my head of where they would just literally just say,
maybe not.
You can't ask that. In other words, that's
saying
forbidden.
Yeah,
they're saying you're forbidden to ask the question.
Yeah, that's a different.
So in other words, in the Islamic schools, when this debate would come up, when this question, if somebody said, hey, wait a minute, how are we saying there's no similarity? And then we try to name Allah. You can't ask that question. If you ask it again, you'll lose your finger. We'll chop your thumbs off. You're not permitted to ask that question. You're not permitted to ask the questions that refute the position.
Yeah, can you imagine if I did that, like in my philosophy? I created a philosophy, and if you question me,
yeah, no, there's a famous hadith. It's the one about the istiwa, like the throne of Allah. Is he like on the throne, over the throne? Like, how do you understand Allah's relation to the throne? There. Yeah, and Imam Malik, he says, I can't remember. Like, there's 4 parts to it. It's like we affirm it, whatever. We don't question it, and it's like the person who questions it is to be put to death. And it's not a joke. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting at. I mean, in other words, when and I mean, you see the same thing when it comes to the attributes, right? Now we have the essence energy distinction. We don't have a problem with analogical predication. This is not a defeater for our system. And when you ask, well, but wait a minute, so the attributes of Allah are not the essence, but they're not other than the essence. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, that's just talking around the question, right? It's a way for them to have a sophistry, a casuistry, very similar to what Thomas did, where they just kind of invent a thing on the spot. Oh, well, the attributes are not the essence. but they're not other than the essence. Meanwhile, all throughout these commentaries, they operate on really strict either or exclusionary principles in epistemology.
That's an excellent point.
All through here, they say either ors. In fact, they even say there's a relation of opposition between Allah and the created order. Allah is the opposite of creatures. Hence why you heard him say the quasi-Gnostic things, that God can't have anything to do with the world. He can't be in the world. It would defile him. If he was in the world, he would be tainted by poop and pee.
Yeah,
I'm not joking. That's what he said.
That was Manichaeanism.
But they also say, they won't say that he's not in the world, but they also say he's not in the world. Like,
well,
yeah, and so that's to get around the questions of, well,
yeah.
Now wait a minute. It says that Allah spoke to so and so. It's just this whole system is ridiculous. It's crude and it's ridiculous. And when you bring up, these kind of advanced level, the whole level of philosophical response that he's doing is literally something frozen in the 11th, 12th century by guys who crudely just cribbed from Aristotle. And there's a really important argument, though, to be made about the cribbing of Aristotle when it comes to perfection and God, Allah, not having any accidents and not have any contingency, not having any notion of what could be applicable to creatures. Now, Akai, maybe you could help me here, because what I was looking for was him to affirm that God is pure act. Because in Aristotelian philosophy, when Aristotle says those things about God or the first cause, that's what leads them to say God is pure act, right? Mm-hmm. Because creatures have potency. They have the ability to do different things, or to change, or to move from one state to another state, to be non-existent and then come into existence, to fulfill their purpose. None of that is appropriate to God, because God is the opposite of creatures, and thus he can't have any of those categories. So Aristotle reasons God must be pure act, thus excluding any potentiality. So to be pure act in Aristotle requires God to eternally act. What does it mean to eternally act? Well, in Aristotle's system, it means that he must eternally actualize. He must be eternally doing something. What is he eternally doing? He's eternally causing to be the opposite of him, which is the world, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I know they don't believe the world is eternally caused, right? But look at what all has been borrowed here. And the point is that it would be more consistent for them to adopt the Aristotelian position, mm-hmm. because God has no accidents, right? God is supremely perfect. And remember, perfection is defined by opposite of creatures. So creatures are changeable. Allah is eternally changeless.
Remember what my argument was? That because it's the same for the Thomists too. God is eternally acting, but that's not contingent upon creation, I want to say. Right. So he's eternally acting, he's eternally creator, and sometimes that act results mysteriously in creating a universe, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I just want to get that straight.
This is the defeater for all the Thomist positions. Yeah.
So what makes it that sometimes it creates a universe and sometimes it doesn't? Well, it's no distinction within God, obviously. So it must be a distinction outside of God. But what's outside of God? Nothing. There was nothing. So you literally have a no reason. This is what it boils down to. This is how silly.
There's no reason.
You have no reason for why God's act that doesn't change, that's always willing and creating. Sometimes it ends up producing a universe and creation. Sometimes it doesn't. Just the way it is. Oh, you can't ask that question.
Yeah, and this is all based on reducing God to these categories. So let's look at this. Okay. Why should their system conclude that God is pure act? Well, because they say that Allah is all perfections, and thus he's unchanging. He's not contingent. He doesn't have any necessity in the sense of relying on any creatures. He is necessary within himself. He's a necessary being. He possesses no accidents or change or potentia. Now, wait a minute. No potentia is the position that God is pure act. They mean the same thing. To say God is pure act is to say God possesses no active or passive potencies. So does that mean that there's an eternal potentia? Because if God eternally had the power to create but didn't decide to, that's potentia. But remember, he says, no, God eternally willed to create, and then it came to be. So he wants his cake and to eat it too, because he believes that God freely wills to create, even though that's from all eternity, right? So in other words, he's saying God has the power to create, but doesn't necessarily have to do it, but he wills to. Oh, but that's potentia. That's admitting dunamis in God that is distinct from actuality. So now we have the problem of he basically is committing himself to a position of God as pure act, but God as pure act commits one to the position that God is eternally creating, because the world is the opposite of the eternal actualizer. So they want their cake and to eat it too. And you can, I think, box them into this position because they don't have the essence-energy distinction. The essence-energy distinction is what allows us to say that, yes, there is potentia. God does have potentia, because I'm not committed to the Aristotelian assumption about perfection.
Purus, yeah.
The only reason the Thomists and these people say that God can't have potentia is a metaphysical presupposition that potentia requires there be some notion of degradation or lack of perfection. What is the basis to believe that God having the ability to create or not to create makes him imperfect? And when you ask the Thomists this, they're like, oh, well, he does, but it's just the effect. And you notice that Asrar did the exact same thing that Thomists do. They equate the act with the created effect. I asked him, what is the action of God to create? He said, is merely the effects. No, you can't identify act with effect, because actions in Allah, right, are multiple. They're really distinct, supposedly, but real distinctions should entail potentiality. They should entail changeability, right? Because God didn't have to create.
Well, the Thomists makes a similar claim too. Yeah. By the way, I forgot to add that point. It's an argument that I make. When you do that kind of natural theology and denial of the energies, and as we pointed out, the problem that those paradigms cannot actually provide a coherent account of an allegea entis, such as the words that even hit intentionally the object of their attention, i.e. God. That's why I actually say, what do you end up doing? You end up creating a phantasm, a concept in your mind. So the thing that you're actually pointing out is not God. It's your own mind. Yep. It's a concept that, so you're not worshiping God. You're actually worshiping your own thoughts. You never actually, that's the consequences of natural theology and denying the energies, is that you end up, worshiping your own thoughts rather than the God. It's not like, oh, I just got some attributes wrong, or I was just kind of off. It's like, you're not even hitting it. It's still inside your head.
So let's look at this. God is eternal act, and this is the argument Dr. Bradshaw makes, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, so wait a minute. He's an eternal act, but that one eternal act sometimes produces a creation, and sometimes it doesn't? So you're going to tell me that God is eternal act, but at the same time, he willed to create at a certain point in time when previously there was no creation. So unless you want to give up ex nihilo creation, right, which is, by the way, what Phaser does in his apologetic book, he says, all right, I'm just going to give up the notion of creation ex nihilo. Oh, okay, well, that's Freemasonry. That's Aristotle. That's not Christianity. How does one eternal act sometimes create and sometimes not? That's a defeater, isn't it?
And then notice that Christopher Tomaszewski's argument, which I think is a terrible argument, is to say, oh yeah, that really is mysterious. But again, those words only have meaning in the effects to us. And so his analogy is that, so imagine there's a baseball player swinging a bat, and his action's the same. but given different circumstances of where the ball's being thrown, he either could be said to be have struck out or hit the ball. Well, the problem with that is if we're talking about the act of creation, well, in the analogy, you have to presuppose that there's an already pre-existent baseball player and pitcher and ball and all this different stuff. But the very question is about what causes the universe to actually come into existence. It's the act, it's the baseball player. So, and sometimes, so that act doesn't change. So sometimes it creates a universe and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, right. I'm sorry, exactly. Like
that was the
presupposing.
That's what I was asking him. That would require change in Allah.
Yeah. So simply moving it to presuppose an already existent universe to explain how that relates then back to God is silly, because the whole question is about, but there was no universe. We're asking, why does the act sometimes produce and create a universe and sometimes not? You can't refer to a non-existent thing and be like, well, that's the reason why. That's the point. So I think Christopher Thomas Quashie's argument is terrible. Like, I don't. But again, they're forced to go that way because of their theology.
Yeah,
they box themselves
keep in mind that they are committed to metaphysical presuppositions that are unquestioned. And so they aren't accepting the revelation first and then making revelation the determiner of the Hellenic presuppositions. They have the Hellenic presuppositions that will determine what revelation means. That is the whole problem of the Thomist and, ironically, of the Muslim. The irony here is that this is not a religion of the book. It's a religion of human conceptions, human autonomy, natural philosophy, and atheism and idolatry, because they're just worshiping the concepts in their own mind.
Also,
that's the irony here.
It is irony. Somebody write that down. This is irony.
I'm serious.
I'm serious too. By the way, don't let me forget to get into the whole issue too about Shar's questioning about our actual doctrine. And that he didn't seem to understand what Orthodox ecclesiology, how the teachings of Christ and the apostles were actually passed down.
You talking about Asrar?
What did I say?
Well, before we get to that, I wanted to make another point on the Thomist too, which is to just try to simplify this argument that I make, which is that there's a simple flaw in the way that Thomists, and this applies as well to any of these natural philosophy systems, you can make similar types of arguments. So remember that the Thomists and the natural philosophy, natural theology proponents say, we know that God exists, that he is. And remember that that is a reference to existence, right? We know God has existence. We don't know what he is, right? So this is a basic starting point principle in Thomism. And by the way, we agree with this as Orthodox. Yeah, we agree that we know that God exists. What he is in his essence, we don't know. So we actually agree with the Thomists on this point. Now remember, that is just a reference to existence. We know that God exists. We don't know what he is. We got a problem though, because the Thomist turns around and says right after that he is his essence. In other words, his existence is identical to his essence. So we have an attribution of identity, in strict identity. Okay, this is not an analogia. This is a strict identity here. God's existence is identical to his essence. So now we have positively predicated of the essence that it is existence and simultaneously denied it in point one. Do you see that this doesn't work? This is a fundamental problem in Thomism, right? So there is a attribution of identity that existence is identical to essence as positive predication. This denies positive predication as a possibility and then turns around and does it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So although it's not identical to the Muslim position, the problem is the same as the problem I was outlining with analogical language, right? The Muslim and the Thomists are just trying to solve the same problem with different routes different solutions that don't work because both positions deny the essence energy distinction in the Orthodox sense.
Just for Muslims who are going to say that what Jay just described is not in Islam, it's I mentioned it. It's look up Wahdat al-Wujud, and you look at that doctrine. They make that exact predication that wujud equals to God. Exactly what Jay just said.
Which is what? Can you flesh that out further? What's wujud?
Existence. They say that like God equals existence, God equals wujud. That doctrine. It's not like kind of like in the it's more kind of like in the Sufi direction. So like if you start getting into Sufism and you go into that direction, that's where that's going to appear. It's not really kind of like in the mainstream Muslim thought. And I'd say the vast majority of Muslims, they won't even understand what this doctrine is. But once you start looking into it, it's there. That's where it's going, in that direction.
And you could translate this into a more formal statement too. I'm trying to think of how you could write that out. A is not B, and then A is B. I mean, really, it just boils down to something that simple. We know that he is, not what he is, but that he is, we know. We know his existence is his essence, but we don't know what his existence is. That's essentially what this is. Hello?
Hello. I think, I was just trying to write that out formally, but I think you got it.
Remember, existence is identical to essence. They are identical, strictly. Right? But then we're saying that God's existence is known, but his essence is not. But his essence is identical to his existence.
It's sort of like there's nothing you can know except for that fact. Right? Like if somebody says, we can't know anything except for what it just said.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a kind of a basic defeater. So, let's see. So we covered the unity and simplicity, Tawhid. We covered analogical predication, distinctions in Allah. We covered his epistemology. We covered how there's a lot of reliance on Aristotle and occasionalism and atomism from the Greeks. And then, but we don't rely on the Greeks, which is silly. There's the question of potentia and eternal willing. There's the question of one thing I didn't get to was all the places of dialectics of opposition. I'll just mention this quickly, which is that this precludes any doctrine of coherence. So in other words, they don't believe in any notion of indwelling.
Yes.
So there's no notion of God dwelling in the world or being present in the world or anything like that. And the argument is that it is the doctrine of the Christians that there's such a thing as indwelling or coherence. However, when it comes to Allah, I don't know, it's not that way. You see, the attributes of Allah are not identical to the essence, but are not other than the essence. So amongst the attributes, there is coherence, there is indwelling. So give me that for Allah and his attributes. You can't have that in your system, by the way.
Yeah, good point.
But the same principle, the essence cannot be present in the attributes, nor can there be a real distinction amongst the attributes. In fact, they will even use in the Sanusi Creed, as I did point out on pages 98, 99, that you can distinguish the names and attributes of Allah the same way that you would distinguish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to 99. So there's an analogy made to numeric lists and distinctions for the divine attributes. Hello? I mean, this doesn't work. Like you just said that you can't do that. And then here you are doing that. Oh, and by the way, the Trinity is wrong because 1, 1, 1 equal 3. 1, 1, 1 equal 1.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, but by the way, I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way up to the 99 names of Allah. It's just silly. First and last are temporal determinations. Temporal determinations bear no similarity to the atemporal, right? Because remember, Allah is not just transcending time and space. He's the opposite of time and space. Don't you understand that when you introduce a dialectics and relations of opposition, which is why this whole system doesn't work, because it's borrowing the basic Hellenic assumptions of the Greeks. This is a fundamentally pagan system, okay? Orthodox theology is based on no dialectics or relations of opposition. The Trinity is not an opposition. The Father is not the opposite of the Son. God is not the opposite of the world. Grace is not the opposite of free will. There are oppositions, sure. Truth and falsehood are in opposition. But that's not the same thing as everything being in opposition simply because it's distinct. This is a fundamental, basic Hellenic metaphysical problem that pagan worldviews adopt that is fundamental to Islam that makes it impossible. And by the way, all things, if that's the case, if these relations are in opposition, then shouldn't all relations be in opposition?
Yes.
Right? Shouldn't one be set against the other 99 names of Allah? Wouldn't Allah then possess relations of opposition if he's both one and many? Oh, no, but in that case, special pleading, it doesn't count.
And by the way, when we actually do make
one more
go
important point, which I did stress multiple times, when they speak of Allah's eternal speech, there's an eternal Quran, the eternal speech of Allah, which is established in his essence, by the way. In time, this speech is reflected in time and has parts. I mean, this is so obviously not nonsense. The eternal, timeless doesn't have parts. And then they're turning around and saying, well, when Allah's eternal speech comes into time, it has parts. There's a parts-whole relationship. This is on page 96 to 98 of the commentary on the Sanusi Creed. Go ahead.
And when we do make distinctions, they're not simply to get out. We actually explain how that's actually possible and what those distinctions mean. It's not an ad hoc rescue. That's something that I was thinking about when you were mentioning. Oh,
right, but we're not foundationalists either, so it's not incumbent upon us to give a sense data account of everything that we posit. Their system they've put a huge amount of weight on them on their shoulders when they start their system with sense data. If there's nothing in the intellect that's not first in the senses, then you can't ever know. God is never in the intellect because God's never in the senses, right?
Mm-hmm. There was something else I was going to add to that. What was it saying?
You said you wanted to say something about absolute succession and tradition.
Yeah, but there was something following up on what you're actually saying. You made me think about something, but oh well. Kai, did you have any points on that, or Jay, you want to add any more?
No, I mean I've got more, but I mean we've been going for a while, so I want you to go ahead and get to the points you wanted with the other things that he brought up.
Oh man, there was another thing. Yeah, it just was there and I lost it. Maybe if I start talking about something else. Well, we mentioned his Manichaeanism, which was weird. The inability to kind of make distinctions. I thought you had a good point of talking about.
Well, he says that the act of God is just simply the effect.
Yeah.
Okay, but the effect is the creatures, so you can't identify the act with the creature. That makes no sense. Silly.
His lack of being able to make distinctions between ritual, ceremonial purity versus moral purity.
Yes, and this was the whole virgin birth, Mary objection.
Yeah. If the other thing that I was thinking about comes to me, then I'll let you know. But do you want to go into?
Well, it's just based on again the dialectic of opposition, that Allah is the opposite of the world, and so therefore I have all of these presuppositions about what's impure, and so Allah can't be anywhere spatially near those things, which is ridiculous because he at every moment in time destroys and recreates those things. So Allah is destroying and recreating poo-poo, but he also can't touch it. I mean, it's just silly, just childish stuff. I'm not being crude. I'm saying that's illustrating the point of the system, that if he's the creator, then he's not any more exempted from the taint of, the impurity by
I create
creating
it, but I won't touch it. Yeah.
but
it's so
but
bad.
He creates
Like, don't.
This is so silly.
Yeah, it was a silly argument. And the other thing too, it just begs the question. Again, just give me all my presuppositions about let me just make up my story. Let me create my mythology. And then I'll explain to you after I create. I don't have to justify that, but then I'll explain to you why that doesn't make sense to me from the story I just made up. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Another point too. I mean, why do we have to give a justification? I know that you and we've discussed this many times, but could you just briefly kind of explain why in philosophy justifications are necessary, and maybe just kind of a brief rundown of what they are?
Because it's a reason to believe something. So, I mean, if you really want to boil down to it, it's either this. Do you want reasons to believe something or no reasons?
Well, remember, he said that it's wrong to believe something on mere authority.
Yeah. So, and if somebody doesn't think justification is important, well, then you're certainly not. Then you're the camp that I don't think that we should have reasons for the things that we believe. Now, that's an infinite regress. We're like, well, do you have a reason for believing that? But the other thing, negative consequence of that, you're not going to be able to turn around and tell somebody they're wrong, because there's no reason for that. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for the person holding. So that's what justification is having reasons and good reasons to believe that your belief is actually true. So you can really boil it down to that. Look, you're either a person that doesn't believe that you should have reasons for your beliefs, which is a reason, and self-defeating, and therefore you can't.
Right.
And also you can't tell anybody that they're wrong. Or you're somebody that believes, yeah, we should have reasons and they should be good reasons. So now let's look for them. What would that be? How would that be possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's
equivalent
to saying that there's no difference between thinking rightly and thinking wrongly.
Yeah.
So if you don't have to justify your beliefs, then okay, well then.
And then the whole talk about things being true and false collapses.
Yeah, it's silly.
Yeah, so now you're just verbal diarrhea, and there's nothing even to say to you.
Mm-hmm. So now, what did you want to say about something to do with apostolic succession and the tradition of the church? I never got the argument he was making there.
Okay, but before I get that, I wanted to. I remembered the point now.
You have to go to the restroom real quick, so go ahead and take over, Father Deacon.
Yeah, Kai, are you there? Am I talking to myself? Hello?
I'm here. Hello? Hello?
So, Kai, what do you think about this? And I'm going to try this this particular tactic. Generally, I use this in debate. And when I coach people in debate, we'll tell them, have the other person, your opponent, repeat back, what do you think my argument is what do you think it is that I believe? Also, what's helpful is to repeat back their argument. So is this actually what you're saying? There's a rhetorical device in that. So with that in mind, I would like to see how, if you asked Muslims that could you tell me, what do you think the Orthodox distinction, how do you think the Orthodox explain the difference between nature and person? What are your thoughts? Like, if we asked Muslims this, how do you think they would respond? Because this really, when they start getting to their objections about the Trinity and the incarnation, obviously that's a failure for them to understand. So it'd be really nice to have, why don't you explain to me what you think the Orthodox position is on that? And if they say they don't know, or they get it wrong, be like, well, wait a minute. How is it that you're making a critique of a position that you actually don't know? I mean, I thought to make a critique of a position, you have to know what the position is, but you don't know what the position is. What do you think about that as a rhetorical device and debate?
Well, I mean, in theory, it's good. I just think practically it doesn't work. It's one of those ones. It's just people typically will just want to talk about what they want to talk about. They don't care what you want to talk about.
They'll deflect.
They'll deflect. Yeah. I find that this kind of engagement is actually more conducive between different like Christians, like Orthodox and others who identify as Christians. They are genuinely trying to understand our position a lot of the times. Not all the times, but a lot of the times. And they're receptive because they want to understand, how do we describe hypostasis, prosopon, the essence, like where are we differing in these things, like so that they can understand what the nomenclature is. But Muslims are just in a whole other category, that they're trying to wholesale just filter the entirety of Christian theology through their Muslim paradigm. And the reason why this doesn't work, like why the approach what you're describing doesn't really work with Islam and with Muslims in particular, is they're preconditioned from very early on to view the Quran as Al-Furqan or something like that. Like it's already given, it's already established that Islam is correct, the Quran is correct, and so everything that you're saying is just being filtered through that particular narrow paradigm. And this is a problem that we encounter, for example, when we try to discuss the persons of the Trinity, and Muslims think of them as attributes. Okay, there are people out there that are right now, they are trying to push this narrative that the persons of the Trinity had no effect on, for example, the development of the Muslim attributes, the way that they see it. And so my first question that I'll ask, well, I mean, I can vary it up a little bit. One of the questions that I would ask that goes around your approach is like, where does this idea of ontologically real distinct attributes come from in Islam? Like it just comes out of nowhere. Like where in your system do you have to justify all of a sudden that you have these distinct attributes that are all real, ontologically real?
Kai, I have a question. I mean,
sure.
Because you know more about this. I mean, won't they just say, oh, well, the Quran? Won't they just appeal to Revelation and say, well, the Quran has...
Yeah, they will. Yeah, they will. They'll appeal to the Quran. But this particular question about the ontological real attributes, you don't actually see it in the Quran.
Is it not actually there? Okay.
It's not actually there. No, it's not actually there. And so what you see is when, I mean, yes, the Quran is used as a foundation, and you get both sides, both the Mu'tazilites and the Ash'aris, they'll each quote different passages to try and substantiate their position, but neither passage what they're going to quote is actually that explicit enough for them to make their case. So then you ask them that question. So like, where's that idea come from? And so you're trying to bring them back into this reference frame to try and get them to understand that the way that they're conceiving of these attributes do actually have some parallel to the Christian Trinity. It's wrong. They've misunderstood our theology. And the Muslims, they think that this doctrine of the attributes kind of grew up in a vacuum, like that in 7th century Arabia, it had absolutely no influence from nobody else. And
well, then Islam, that's the first video you made, isn't it, about this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it touches upon this in the first video that I made, where I'm saying it's like, you look at it historically, you have Jews, you have Mu'tazilites, like they're all saying, look, you're doing what the Christians are doing, because for example, you'll have in the New Testament, it'll make predications to Christ, to the Holy Spirit, like life or wisdom or knowledge. And so they appropriate that term and they just see that that's an attribute. But they lose that whole baggage of what a hypostasis is, what a person is, what is all of that implication. And so when you start kind of peeling away the onion, you can start getting them to see how the attributes, they aren't what the persons of the Trinity are, but how they have their roots in it, and where the Muslims have historically deviated from it. And I'm not going to name this individual, but when I talk about it, people are going to know who I'm talking about. This person parades himself as if he is knowledgeable in Islam. He's absolutely an ignoramus when it comes to Islam. And he's trying to basically say that the attributes have nothing to do with the persons of the Holy Trinity. Go and look up Ghazali. Ghazali is explicit when whether he narrates what the Christians are telling him or Ghazali himself is of that position. It doesn't matter how he gets that. It's his understanding is explicit that he's saying that to conceive of the akanim, the uknum of the Christian's Trinity, the hypostases, you liken them to the sifat, their attributes. That's what they are. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're equivalent to the Islamic attributes, but that you just basically boil them down to attributes. And so,
yeah, I've got the links to those videos there in the chat for people, and I put it in the show description.
Yeah, and so this, like, you have these people, like the Muslims, they're not familiar enough with their own sources. Okay, they're not. They just think like Islam. No, but like they think that this theology, like the Kalam or whatever, it's kind of like in a vacuum. It was kind of developed in a vacuum, no influence from everywhere else.
Right.
One thing, for example, that Lewis and I that we have planned to work on in the future, even if you take away all the Neoplatonism, you take away the Aristotelianism, you take all of that, and you just reduce it to the core beliefs in Islam, like for example, the pre-existence of souls or whatever you would, the concept of justice. Whatever. There's still a ton of influence from Stoicism, and the Salafis, they're going to get shocked when we make this video demonstrating that the Salafis, they're so vehemently against philosophy, but ton of their beliefs that they think are Quranic are actually coming from Stoicism. And there are just too many of these to be a coincidence. There are just too many of these. And so this is one of the approach that we're taking, was like slowly peeling away the onion. And that's the only way that we can kind of break through to Muslims. I mean, as much as I do enjoy, I like your tactic that you have, Father Deacon, but it's just one of practicality. It's going to work with certain individuals, but wholesale with Muslims, it's not going to work.
All right.
It's not going to work.
We're going to have to get to the super chats here. We've been going for a while. I'm going to let you guys have any concluding thoughts, either one of you, Father Deacon, Kai, if you want to, and then we'll get to the super chats.
Yeah, just concluding, again, his questions about you and how our doctrine revealed his kind of presuppositions already about that. Well, they derive all of their doctrine from a book. We don't derive our theology and doctrine from the Bible, right? We received the apostolic deposit of faith before the writings. The writings are a testament and are part of that, right? But we don't have to. And the way, how do we know that is, again, to go back to how that was transmitted, who was sent, the authority, how that was, and there's extra corroboration of that too in history and by, Polycarp and other early writers,
right.
Ignatius and stuff like that, about like, this is how the teaching, the apostolic deposit of faith, of which scripture testifies is only a small part, is passed down and actually preserved. And so through the oral teaching and through the structure and episcopacy and the authority, the monarchical authority given by God to the apostles to the bishops, obviously that's something that he doesn't know. And without something like that, I mean, I was just thinking about this, there'd be no way to actually say that the text itself wasn't corrupted, which is what they always accuse us of, right? Like, oh, your text is corrupted. but we don't rely on the text is a necessary and sufficient condition.
That's also a very later Muslim argument. I mean, this is not an argument made in the first several centuries of Islam. In fact, the Quran says that the Bible is not corrupt. So that's just an apologetic thing that they adopt down the road. And it's interesting because, by the way, I mean, wouldn't that be in the Quran if the purpose of Allah sending a prophet like Muhammad was to correct the mistakes that have been there? Why does it say and speak as if the Torah, the prophets, and the gospel are from Allah? I mean, there's nothing there in the first few centuries about the text being corrupted. It's a much later argument that they steal.
Yep.
Isn't that right, Kai?
It is. No, absolutely. Absolutely it is. You just have internal evidence from the Quran itself. Like, for example, it says, and I talked about this in my video with regards to Saint Athanasius. I bring up the point. It's like the Quran tells you, go to the people of the gospel, go to the people of the Injil, Ahlul Injil. That's presupposing that they exist. If the gospel was corrupted, and if they didn't have the gospel, then you're not going to the Ahlul Injil. You're not going to the people of the gospel.
The first 10 surahs are all just citing for the most part. There's a couple things that are off, but it's acting and citing the Bible as if it's correct.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like, go to those who have the scriptures. I mean, why would you go to someone if they have corrupted scriptures?
Great point.
What the verses are getting at is, it's not that the scriptures are corrupted. It's getting at people who are taking scriptures and twisting the meanings for their own personal gain. So how do you twist the meaning? You just give a false tafsir, for example, a false commentary. You read into the commentary. So what would be an example? Like, let's say the Shia, they will read exactly the same Quran as the Sunnis, but certain words, they're going to interpret it differently. Like, they'll say, and obey the ones who are in authority among you. The Sunnis, they're going to refer that as the scholars. The Shia, they're going to say, no, those are referring to the imams. Okay, so this is what it means to twist the meaning or the message of scripture. People who are taking these words and twisting the meanings of it. And that's what the Quran is saying that Christians and Jews were doing, or accusing them of doing, twisting the meanings.
Yeah, it's not an argument that the texts were corrupted.
Exactly. It's purely not an argument that the texts were corrupted. Absolutely. That comes later on.
Much later, right.
Much later, yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, so we're ready to get to Super Chats. Flying Cycle sends a circle $10. Can you recommend History of the Church? I started Philip Schaff's, and I wanted to know if there's a good source to continue as an Orthodox inquirer. Yeah, the Yaroslav Pelikan's 5-volume.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. I did a whole lecture on volume 1. So those are all good. So, Tony, $5. Excellent debate. Thank you, Tony. Orthodoxy Chloroquine, $25. Thank you for breaking this down in the review. Jay, the debate with Asrar was fantastic. I couldn't help but notice that his responses were strikingly similar to those of all the papal lawyers and the Tradcat Thomists. Exactly. And that's a perfect parallel that everyone should note. This was quite comical, actually. It was comical, as is both Islam and Thomism. Smith, $10. When Asrar Rashid implied that Christology was in total flux until Nicaea, which is not true, by the way, I was thinking it would be great to put all the clear pre-Nicene Trinitarian writings into a stream or a document. But you can easily pull this up. Like in 5 minutes, you can find, the pre-Nicene Church Fathers teaching all the same things we teach: the deity of Christ, 3 persons with full divinity, etc. But yeah, we could do a stream on that. That's a great idea. Tactical LARP, $3. Would you guys say that the Islamic Aqidah are comparable to the different contradictory schools of thought or spirituality in the Roman Catholic Church, such as Thomism, Scotism, and various schools? It's more akin to the different groups of Protestantism. because you basically have these schools of thought debating traditions, debating hadiths, debating what it is to what tawheed means. So, yeah, I guess in a sense, Roman Catholicism has different schools, but I mean, it's more like Protestant, like different sects amongst Protestants than it is. What would you say?
Yeah, no. The analogy with Protestant, that's a good analogy. And one of the easiest example to cite, and this is the absolute easiest example. So you have the Ash'ari and you have the Maturidi. The Maturidis, they'll say that taqween is an eternal attribute alongside the other eternal attributes. The Ash'ari school says it's not. Well, I mean, it can't be both. It's either going to be one or the other.
By the way, isn't Islam true because we all believe one thing, right? They act as if they don't have debates. I mean, it's so silly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just silly. But no, you their differences at like the most fundamental level, like attributes, and you're telling me one says this is a real attribute, the other one says it's a created attribute.
But we all teach the same thing.
But we all believe in the same thing. Yeah, no, it's you have a plurality of views. You've got views that are completely diametrically opposed. It's not unified. I would honestly say that it's even worse than Protestantism.
Pano Costoros, $1. Let's not forget that St. John of Damascus got his hand chopped off for writing against Islam so well. Mez Michael, $25. Good job in the debate, Jay. God bless you all. I plan to start visiting an Orthodox church. Cool. That's great to hear.
Awesome. Praise God.
Pano Costoros, $1. Get your divine acts together, Muslims. Haha. Charlie Brown, 76, $10. This is great information. It's complicated, but I enjoyed it. Well, yeah, hopefully if you just kind of maybe watch it a few times or the things that didn't click, eventually it will click. Rat Splat, again, $5. I'm getting baptized Saturday, Jay. Thank you for introducing me to Orthodoxy. Glory to God. Yes, and I'm attending one of my friends who is a Uniate and now Orthodox baptism this upcoming weekend. So looking forward to that. Praise all right. That's all I see. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Anything else? By the way, I've got the links. You want to follow Father Deacon, I've added him to the show description there. He's Norwegian News. And then Orthodox Shahada is linked there second. The video that we spoke about with regard to Islam's confusion about attributes and persons is linked. You can still super chat at any time, by the way, if you want to support my work. You can order signed copies of my book. We have a show sponsor, which is chalk.com, which is legit. She legit. Mushrooms, to get your mojo back, you can use the promo code JAY to get a 10% discount. If you go to chalk.com, the link is there. You can also sign up for my website at jaysanalysis.com. We got one more super chat. Woody Woo says, I have a question. Why do Calvinists get wrong? What do Calvinists get wrong about predestination that is not in accordance with what the church teaches, especially reconciling omnipotence with temporal causality and free will? Well, the problem more so boils down to there not being a consistent idea of created energies. So creatures don't possess an energy which is proper to their nature, and so they have a problem with synergy, or to what degree or how real synergy is in terms of our cooperation with the divine energies. Hence why they become very, I guess you could say, ambiguous when it comes to the Sixth Council's teaching about Christ possessing two wills and two energies, which many Calvinists give credence to. But when you really flesh that out, that requires that human will have its own natural energy and property that's not destroyed in the fall. So basically, Calvinism ends up in the monergist, monoenergist, monothelite heresy. That's the problem. All right. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody.